Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Tonight, we're diving into Chapter 3 of Real and Scary Home Horror Stories, where we explore 3 chilling encounters that prove your home might not be as safe as you think. So, grab a blanket, turn down the lights, and prepare yourself for 3 tales of fear that hit a little too close to home. Let's get into the first story. Story 1. The Unexpected Return. Mark let out a long sigh of relief as he unlocked the door to his house, the comforting creak of the hinges welcoming him home after a much-needed vacation. It had been a week of pure relaxation, sunny beaches, late-night dinners, and no responsibilities. But after the long flight and the chaos of airports, there was nothing Mark wanted more than to sink into his sofa and savor the familiarity of home. The house smelled slightly stale, a mixture of still air and faint traces of the cleaning spray he'd used before leaving. He stepped over his suitcase, letting it sit just inside the door. "I'll unpack tomorrow," he muttered to himself. Mark headed straight to the kitchen, grabbing a soda and a leftover slice of pizza he'd forgotten to toss before leaving. Exhausted, he collapsed onto the couch, the slice still in hand. The hum of the refrigerator in the background and the distant chirp of crickets outside gave the house a sense of life, despite its emptiness. He didn't bother turning on the TV or unpacking his bags. Within minutes, he was fast asleep, the half-eaten slice of pizza resting on a napkin by his side. Mark woke with a jolt several hours later, his heart pounding. At first, he wasn't sure what had startled him. The house was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that presses in on you and makes you feel like you're not alone. The pizza had gone cold, and his soda can sat untouched on the coffee table. Something felt wrong. He glanced at his phone. It was 3:13 a.m. Rubbing his eyes, he sat up, trying to shake off the grogginess. As he did, a faint draft brushed against his neck. He turned toward the source of the cold air and froze. The back door was slightly open. For a moment, Mark sat there, staring at the door. He distinctly remembered locking it before going to bed, didn't he? His stomach churned as he stood, moving cautiously toward the door. The closer he got, the more he could see. The lock was broken, the metal bent and splintered as if someone had forced their way in. His mind raced. Was someone still in the house? He glanced around the living room, his eyes scanning the dark corners, but nothing seemed out of place. Mark's hands shook as he locked the door and shoved a chair against it for good measure. He flipped on the kitchen lights, flooding the downstairs with a warm glow. The light reassured him, but only slightly. He searched the main floor, checking behind the couch, inside the pantry, even under the dining table. Everything seemed untouched. Still, he couldn't shake the growing unease in his chest. Whoever had broken the lock hadn't stolen anything, at least not yet. Mark grabbed a heavy flashlight from the kitchen counter, gripping it tightly as he crept toward the stairs. The wooden steps groaned under his weight, and every sound echoed through the quiet house. He cursed the noise under his breath, wishing he could move silently. The hallway upstairs stretched out in front of him, shrouded in shadow. His bedroom door was open, and so were the doors to the bathroom and guest room. He checked the bathroom first. Nothing. The guest room was empty, too, just as he'd left it. But as he turned to leave, he heard it. Footsteps. They were faint, but unmistakable, coming from the master bedroom at the end of the hall. Mark's blood turned to ice. He wasn't alone. He tightened his grip on the flashlight, his breath shallow and rapid. Slowly, he stepped into the hallway, his heart pounding so loudly he thought it might give him away. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice trembling despite his effort to sound firm. The footsteps stopped. Mark stood frozen, his flashlight beam aimed toward the bedroom. He waited, his mind racing through every possibility. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe he was imagining it. But then he heard a faint creak, the sound of weight shifting on the wooden floor. Mark took a step back, his instincts screaming at him to run. He turned and bolted down the stairs, nearly tripping in his haste. Once he reached the kitchen, he grabbed his phone and dialed 911, his voice shaking as he explained the situation. "I think there's someone in my house," he said. The dispatcher tried to calm him, assuring him that officers were on their way. Mark stayed on the line, clutching the phone like a lifeline. As he waited, he heard movement upstairs, the faint sound of footsteps crossing the floor, followed by the creak of the stairs. Mark's heart sank. The intruder was coming down. He grabbed a knife from the counter, his knuckles white as he held it in front of him. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs, but before Mark could see who, or what, was there, the person bolted for the back door. Mark heard the door crash open and the sound of footsteps disappearing into the night. By the time the police arrived, the house was empty. They searched every room, every closet, and every shadowed corner, but the intruder was gone. "What's strange," one of the officers said as they inspected the broken lock, "is that they didn't take anything. No electronics, no money, nothing." Mark nodded, though the realization did little to calm his nerves. Whoever had been in his house wasn't there to steal. But if that wasn't their goal, what was? Over the next few days, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He had the lock repaired, installed a security system, and even slept with a bat by his bed. But the memory of that night lingered. He thought about the intruder's footsteps, the deliberate way they'd moved through his house. Had they been watching him as he slept on the couch? How long had they been there before he woke up? Mark would never know the answers. The intruder was never caught, and no explanation ever came. But the experience left him with a chilling realization. The scariest thing about that night wasn't the broken lock or the footsteps in the dark. It was the fact that someone had been in his house, silently observing him, waiting. Story 2. The Rainy Night at the Gas Station. Samantha's night shifts at the gas station were usually uneventful. She'd been working there for nearly a year, and most nights were the same. A trickle of customers, the hum of fluorescent lights, and the steady ticking of the clock as the hours dragged on. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, and she didn't mind the quiet. But quiet can turn sinister, especially when the wrong kind of people show up. It was a rainy Wednesday night. The kind of rain that wasn't heavy but constant, drumming softly against the windows and making everything outside look blurred and distorted. By midnight, Samantha hadn't seen a customer in over an hour. She passed the time organizing snacks on the shelves, scrolling through her phone, and staring at the security monitor behind the counter. The lot outside was empty, save for her car parked near the front entrance. Occasionally, headlights would flicker in the distance as a car passed by on the highway, but no one stopped. Until they did. At 12:37 a.m., 3 cars pulled into the lot, one after the other. They didn't park near the pumps or the entrance. Instead, they lined up along the far edge of the lot, their engines still running. Samantha's eyes flicked to the security monitor. The grainy footage showed 5 men spread across the 3 cars. They were talking, but she couldn't make out their faces or hear what they were saying. She felt a prickle of unease. It wasn't unusual for groups of people to stop by late at night, but something about this felt wrong. They weren't getting gas or coming into the store. They were just sitting there, watching. Minutes passed. Samantha tried to focus on her tasks, but her eyes kept darting to the monitor. The men were still there. Finally, one of them got out of his car. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a dark hoodie that obscured most of his face. He walked toward the store slowly, his movements deliberate, as if he was taking his time. The automatic doors slid open with a soft whoosh as he stepped inside. "Hey there," Samantha said, trying to keep her voice casual. The man didn't respond. He walked past the counter, heading to the back of the store. A second man entered, then a third. They didn't speak to each other. They didn't browse. They just moved through the aisles, their eyes scanning the shelves and the exits. The hair on the back of Samantha's neck stood on end. "Can I help you find something?" she asked, her voice a little sharper this time. Again, no response. The 4th and 5th men entered, and now the store felt suffocating. Samantha could feel their presence, the way they moved like predators circling prey. Then, one of them approached the counter. He placed a folded piece of paper in front of her and stepped back. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. The message was scrawled in jagged handwriting. "Stay calm. Don't call the cops. Put all the cash in the bag." Samantha's stomach dropped. She glanced at the man, then at the others scattered around the store. None of them said a word, but their body language was clear. They weren't asking, they were demanding. She opened the register with shaky hands, pulling out the bills and placing them into a plastic bag. The man at the counter watched her closely, his face unreadable. As she handed over the bag, she noticed the store was eerily silent. None of the men were talking. They moved with a kind of eerie calm, like they'd done this before. When the man took the bag, he nodded once and turned to leave. One by one, the others followed, walking out of the store and back to their cars. Samantha stayed frozen behind the counter, her heart pounding as she watched them on the monitor. They didn't speed off like she'd expected. Instead, they sat in their cars for a few more minutes, their headlights cutting through the rain. Then, as suddenly as they'd arrived, they were gone. Samantha called the police immediately, her voice trembling as she described what had happened. The officers arrived within 15 minutes, but by then, the men were long gone. They probably targeted this station because it's isolated, one of the officers said as they reviewed the security footage. Easy in, easy out. The footage didn't provide much detail. The rain and the dim lighting made it difficult to make out the men's faces or the license plates on their cars. You did the right thing by cooperating, another officer told her. It's better to lose a little cash than to risk getting hurt. Samantha nodded, but the words did little to comfort her. The robbers hadn't used weapons or threats, but their calm, methodical approach was somehow more terrifying. They didn't need to intimidate her. They knew the quiet pressure of their presence was enough. In the weeks that followed, Samantha found herself growing paranoid during her shifts. Every car that pulled into the lot, every customer who walked through the doors, felt like a potential threat. She started second-guessing her decision to work late nights. She'd always thought of the gas station as a quiet, boring place, but now it felt like a trap, a brightly lit box surrounded by darkness. Eventually, she quit. The money wasn't worth the constant fear, the sleepless nights, or the recurring nightmares of the men returning. But even after leaving the job, the memory of that rainy night stayed with her. She couldn't forget the way the men had looked at her, calm, calculating, as if she were just another obstacle in their plan. And she couldn't shake the feeling that, for them, it wasn't just about the money. It was about control. Story 3. The Man at the Door. Jeremy was 22 and living in his first apartment, just a short walk from his college campus. It wasn't anything special, small, a bit outdated, and a little noisy at times, but it was home. The building had a cozy, laid-back vibe, with only a few tenants. Jeremy didn't know most of them well, but they were friendly enough, especially the woman who lived directly below him. She was quiet, kept to herself, and occasionally waved when their paths crossed. On a Friday night, after a grueling week of classes and assignments, Jeremy was settling in for a quiet evening. His roommates were out, so he had the place to himself. A bowl of ramen sat steaming on his desk as he scrolled through social media, his headphones blasting music to drown out the distant hum of the TV in the neighboring apartment. But as the night wore on, the usual background noises of the building began to shift. Around 10 p.m., Jeremy felt a faint vibration through the floor, followed by a sharp, rhythmic banging sound coming from downstairs. At first, he assumed it was just his downstairs neighbor moving furniture or hanging something on the walls. But as the minutes ticked by, the bangs grew louder, more urgent, almost frantic. Jeremy took off his headphones, his curiosity piqued. He stepped into the living room, where the sound was even clearer, loud, deliberate thuds, accompanied by muffled shouting. His brow furrowed. Was she in trouble? Jeremy debated whether to go downstairs and check on her, but something held him back. The shouting sounded strange, like it wasn't coming from her voice, but someone else's. He decided to stay put, keeping an ear on the noise. Around midnight, the banging stopped. The sudden silence was unnerving, as if the entire building was holding its breath. Jeremy sat frozen on the couch, straining to hear any sign of movement. Then he heard it, soft, shuffling footsteps just outside his door. His heart skipped a beat. The footsteps stopped, and then came the knock. It wasn't polite. It was sharp, insistent, and relentless, echoing through the quiet hallway. Jeremy crept toward the door, his pulse racing. He hesitated before looking through the peephole, afraid of what he might see. There, standing just a foot away, was a man. He looked unkempt. His hair was messy, his clothes wrinkled and damp as if he'd been out in the rain. His face was pale, and his lips moved silently, like he was talking to himself. Jeremy's stomach churned. The man wasn't someone he recognized from the building. "Can I help you?" Jeremy called out, his voice trembling. The man didn't respond. Instead, he leaned closer to the door, his muttering growing louder. Jeremy could now make out fragments of what he was saying. "They're in the walls. Gotta get in. It's here somewhere." Jeremy backed away, his hands shaking as he grabbed his phone. He dialed 911, whispering to the dispatcher about what was happening. "There's a guy outside my door," he said. "I think he's trying to break in." As if on cue, the man started banging on the door, harder this time. Jeremy jumped, his panic escalating. The dispatcher told him to stay calm and stay on the line, assuring him that officers were on their way. But the man didn't stop. The banging grew louder, more violent, and Jeremy could hear the door frame creaking under the pressure. Just when Jeremy thought the man might break through, the banging stopped. The silence was almost worse, the anticipation unbearable. He held his breath, listening for any sign of movement. Then, a new sound reached his ears, the unmistakable scrape of metal against the lock. Jeremy's blood ran cold. The man had something, maybe a screwdriver, maybe a crowbar, and he was trying to force his way inside. Jeremy locked himself in his bedroom, shoving his dresser against the door. He clutched the phone tightly, his knuckles white as he whispered updates to the dispatcher. The scraping continued, punctuated by the occasional muttered curse from the man outside. Jeremy could hear the madness in his voice, the unhinged determination. Minutes felt like hours, but finally, Jeremy heard the distant wail of sirens. The sound seemed to startle the man. The scraping stopped, and Jeremy heard frantic footsteps retreating down the hallway. The police arrived moments later, bursting into the building and quickly apprehending the man just outside. Jeremy emerged from his room cautiously, his legs trembling as he walked to the door. An officer explained that the man had been found with a crowbar in his hands, muttering about finding the treasure in the walls. But the real horror came when the police investigated further. They discovered that the man had first entered the building through the downstairs apartment. Jeremy's neighbor, the quiet, friendly woman he'd passed in the hall so many times, had been attacked. She hadn't survived. The man, they explained, was heavily intoxicated and rambling about secret hiding places in the walls. It was pure chance that he'd moved on to Jeremy's door instead of continuing his rampage downstairs. Jeremy moved out of the apartment a week later. He couldn't bring himself to stay, not after what had happened. The sounds of that night, the frantic banging, the muttering, the scraping of metal against the lock, haunted him. He often thought about his neighbor, about the moments before the man had come to his door. Had she been as confused as he was? Had she thought it was just a harmless noise, something mundane? The realization that he had been just one door away from the same fate was something he couldn't shake. And that wraps up Chapter 3 of Real and Scary Home Horror Stories. These tales remind us that danger doesn't always come from far away. It can be just outside your door or even already inside your home. If you enjoyed these stories, or if they gave you goosebumps, make sure to hit that like button and share this video with a friend who loves a good scare. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more spine-chilling content. Have a creepy story of your own? Drop it in the comments below. You never know, it might just make it into a future video. Until next time, stay safe, stay vigilant, and remember, sometimes the scariest things are the ones we don't see coming.